Okay, so the Stop Killing Games been around for a bit now with Ross and everything. I watched the original video with Ross too. I'm going to link that as well. But Pirate Games made a reaction video to the whole thing, and I want to watch this, so we are going to watch it through. Then I'm going to talk about what I think at the end of it and throw the video too, but I'm going to summarize at the end. If you just want to hear the summarized version, just skip to the end. So yeah, I will tell that every time.
Hi, my name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Software Online. I've been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Game Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software, by the same name, which is an indie studio, and I've been here for about 8 years now. I also run a massive community. We've got about 180,000 people in Discord, and most of what I do is try to teach other people how to make games, teach them that they can make games, show them the tools to do so, and try to do everything without any paywalls or bullshit in the way. It's incredibly important to me that we keep making games, and that the next generation has the tools to do so, so that our medium doesn't die out. And it never will. And that's the whole intention of all of this. So with that in mind, that community brought me this and tried to get me to sign it. And I don't want to. Number one, I can't because I don't live in Europe. But number two, I wouldn't sign it even if I could. And I'm going to kind of go through this and try to explain the reasoning as to why that would be the case, without all of the internet hate machine that's grown up around it. So let's go into how this works and why this is an issue to me. First things first, what is an initiative? So an initiative is actually not law. It is something that you put together so you can put it up in front of representatives and they can start the conversation. The reason why I have a problem with Stop Killing Games is specifically it starts the wrong conversation. If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it. And the reason why is specifically on this initiative, under its own description, it says, this initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union or related features and assets sold for video games they operate to leave said video games in a functional playable state.
Okay, this part is the weird wording that I don't really agree with. This part. Like, all related features and assets sold for video games they operate. They talk about skins and microtransactions in a game. They want you to be able to use that. That is impossible. Like how? That part for me bleeding in so many ways. Like, if they make the game after they don't support it open source, then everything you bought in the game can be just added to your stuff. Literally. So there is no point to this part at all. Like, how are you going to keep a Valorant skin after the game shut down? There are so many weird and weird wordings in this voting that is insane. They need to rewrite this and start again.
Specifically, the initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher. This isn't always possible in all video games, and it doesn't call out the specific practice that this is supposedly trying to defeat. It is incredibly vague and will damage all live service games. How would you keep League of Legends in a functional playable state? You'd have to re-architect the entire game. The game is what is called client-server. So in client-server models, there's a server and there's a client, and all of the math, all of the game, everything happens on the server. The client just displays it. And the reason we want to do it that way is so that you can't teleport around and do 1 billion damage. You don't trust the client.
Even if that's not a thing, people are still scripting their ass off in League.
Trust the server. The client just
even in League, bro.
Told,
like what?
Right? So if we wanted to re-architect this, we'd have to take all of that server logic, push it back out into the client, and somehow make that playable in a multiplayer-only video game. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
so this isn't going to work for all
fair.
games. Why is it calling out all games? And it's really easy to say like, oh, you know, that'll get worked out down the line. But we're dealing with government here. If we're going to be putting up these types of ideas specifically in front of government, we need to be calling out the right issues, especially if we don't have precedent set. Because now you're going to be setting precedent on something that doesn't make any sense with people that may not understand the nuance of our industry, all in the name of saving games. I can't agree with that. So let's go into why this is happening, right?
And one more thing to add here is that I feel like the whole initiative is just not worded correctly. It's really vague, and that vagueness of this wording, that it's like not goes into separate things and separate like occasions, or like it does not bring up enough examples, I feel like. And overall, it's not the best for the developers, especially for like indie studios that just cannot support the game or cannot like take on that much workload to make it in that way as well. Although if it comes to law and they will have to make it this way in general, that would help a lot. But for example, games like Counter-Strike or whatever games that you play, it will carry the risk that there is going to be like more cheaters than there already is. Or one thing that could be done is that they give you the server files or something similar to it, or just a dumber version, so you are able to run a server on your own PC. Something like a home server.
So why did this start in the first place? What is the specific cases they've called out that are egregious? And they have one. It's The Crew. So action on The Crew. The video game The Crew, published by Ubisoft, was recently destroyed for all players and had a player base of at least 12 million people.
That is
Due to the
false.
game's size and France's strong consumer protection laws, this represents one of the best opportunities to hold a publisher accountable for this action. If we're successful in charges being pressed against Ubisoft, this can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying.
Is it Ubisoft or Ubisoft? I mean, Thor says Ubisoft, so I would assume it's Ubisoft. But I heard so many people call it Ubisoft that I am just confused.
More games. First off, I don't like the idea in this that it has a player base of 12 million people. That is not how long-running games work. There is a large number of people that buy the game, and that player base slowly dwindles off until nobody is playing it anymore. If there's any costs associated with keeping the game online, which this was an online video game, then eventually it costs more to keep it online than it does to keep running it, right? So the cost outweighs the amount of income for it. There are bad business practices that can occur in there. There are companies that will sell a online-only game as a single-player experience and kind of just put it into the TOS and hide it. But not all companies do that.
That is something that they started to do now. That is why this initiative would be really important to get a rewrite, because right now many publishers are coming out with single-player games that specifically require just in general access to the internet. When it is a single-player game, you should be able to put a disc or whatever, a pen drive into your PC, install the game, and play the game. Especially with single-player games. Even if you don't sell a physical copy, you should be able to download the installer and have it once you bought it, because it is a single player game. It should be something that you can play like that, and that is a ridiculous part there.
They do, we should be calling out that specific company, not all companies. So let's take a look at this and find out more about The Crew itself. If we pull up their Wikipedia, we can see that The Crew was actually created in 2014, which, much to the hatred of all of us oldies on the internet, was 10 years ago.
Oh god.
So this was an online-only racing video game developed by Ubisoft Ivory Tower and Ubisoft Reflections and published by Ubisoft. So all Ubisoft, right? With that in mind, it said it was a scaled-down recreation of the contiguous United States and included both role-playing and large-scale multiplayer elements. So it had a massive multiplayer component to it. It is an online-only service-based game, and they shut it down 10 years later. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering the game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they posted as not an online-only experience. But everything that...
No. It was specifically marketed that it's like an open-world MMO car game. That is how it came out like back then. That is how I seen the first thing. And that is why I was interested in this game too. Because I was like, what, MMO car game, and we can just go around the whole of the US and do stuff and all that thing. So it was specifically marketed to be an open world multiplayer thing. It was never a single player thing. So that's why I don't even understand this example for this.
I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online only. If you're going to be buying an online only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And if the servers need to shut down in the future, far in the future, it makes sense to me for the access to that game to be cut if it's online
Yeah.
only. If it's a
Yes.
single player experience that has online only functionality specifically just to shut down the game in the future, and the online only doesn't actually add any gameplay functionality, I'd agree with you. That's a shitty business practice. But that's really rare. And in the specific cases where it does happen, we should call out that, not just all games and not all live service games.
Yeah.
Further, there's more context to this too. The Crew itself came out in 2014, but it actually had a sequel that came out in 2018. And then it had another sequel that came out in 2023. And if we go to the Crew's SteamDB, which again is not going to be all of the player base for this, it's only going to show the ones who were playing it through Steam. It was on multiple platforms. We look at the max here, it did start out with a sizable amount of community, and then it degraded. And it had a major drop-off in 2018, which is the same year that it launched a sequel. This is normal. When a sequel comes out, a lot of the player base, if the sequel doesn't suck, will move over to it. And then the servers effectively die. You can't run a live service game on this few players.
Like, bro, there was like 6 players there. There is no live service game that is going to run with that much people.
You can't.
Especially
most of the
for
time, especially
servers.
not if there's anything else that goes into it. And if we go into that anything else, and we could see that there was license problems. So on December 14th, 2023, Ubisoft delisted the Crew and its expansions from digital platforms, suspended sales of microtransactions, and announced that the game's servers would shut down on March 31st. So they gave them 3 months. Usually I would say, hey, 6 months is probably a better deal, but if they're going to do 3 months, they're going to do 3 months. The only thing that I'd be interested outside of that is if there was a contractual obligation to do more than 3 months and they didn't follow it.
Probably
if it was in the
license
terms of
things.
service or not. Citing upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. What were those licensing constraints? Well, it turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies. And a 10-year running game likely means that they had license to them for 10 years. And
That is funny because not every game gets licensed for real life things. The fact that the Crew had these, that's already really rare, I feel like. Like something like Forza Horizon, games like that do have licenses, I'm pretty sure. But for example, non-car game, but like Escape from Tarkov, they don't have any gun licenses. And they model guns one-to-one into the game. And model military gear one-to-one into the game without the correct licenses. So it is a weird place to be, but I feel like car companies are more likely to go after you if you put their cars into the game, not like military things. Although I'm pretty sure like Glock is one of those companies that go after games that put their weapons in anything.
that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation. Now, understand that's speculation, but I've seen this type of a deal many times in the industry while I've been working in it. So it's not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money. When you already have sequels out and the game has basically no players left anyway, it makes more sense to just move on.
Although I don't really agree completely on this, just like the reason why, because what I mentioned before. For example, the Escape from Tarkov has the single-player Tarkov mod. And the single-player Tarkov modders, not developers, just letting you know there, they made it so that you can run your own in-house server on your PC and play on it. And there's already mods and everything where you can run server and other players can join too. So I don't think that it would be that difficult to make that server happen. Of course, it depends on the game, but I feel like it's more about the licensing of these cars than the server.
don't find that to be a problem from the developer perspective, and I understand that people find that to be a problem from the player perspective. These are two different ideologies, and that's okay to have two different ideologies. I just won't agree with it because I understand the burden that puts if we raise that problem in the way that we are right now. If you try...
Like I said before, I don't think... I mean, okay, I'm not someone who is a game developer. That should be obvious. But I feel like if game modders can make servers for so many different games, even for games that did not have servers before, then I don't think a full developer team would find it hard to do that. At least that's my logic here. It might be more like nuance, and it might be very different depending on the game and how the game is built. But from what I see from like Tarkov and what I've seen from Warhammer Age of Reckoning, that's an old MMORPG that it still runs this day, and it's not the developer that runs the servers. So I feel like it should be possible to do these things.
Try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them. And we're going to miss out on adventures like Final Fantasy XIV. And even though I don't play anymore, League of Legends or any...
Yeah, but then why don't we talk about the private servers? I'm pretty sure there are Final Fantasy private servers. I would assume there are. I don't know if there is one or not, but I would assume there is. Because I did not see an MMORPG that did not have private servers. I did not see one. Every MMORPG I have ever played had and have private servers running. So I don't think it will be that much of a work if someone in their home can just make a server, basically.
other live service game, any of them. You're talking everything, like even phone games, as funny as that is. A lot of people don't realize that phone games require online-only activity.
Yeah, definitely.
What about things like Pokemon Go? What about stuff like Monster Hunter Now? What about any of them? We'd never get any of them. And that's why I think this needs to not be vague. It needs to be specific.
It needs to be specific. That I agree with.
Which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary and doesn't add any gameplay elements.
Yep.
That's the problem. So now we're going to go to Ross, otherwise known as Accursed Farms, the creator of this initiative, and one of the ones that's pushing it the most online. I'm going to let him say exactly why he thinks that this will go through very easily and why it is important, and then I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it.
Comes law in the EU? Yeah, it might be. Now, it's not a guarantee, but I think if we get the signatures, this passes. Why do I say that? Well, it's a few factors. Politicians like easy wins, and this doesn't require them to do much at all. And unless it involves gambling or protecting children, politicians generally don't care about video games. So this isn't of big consequence to them or most of their constituencies.
I'm going to stop it there for a moment. The assertion that politicians just like easy wins, so this legislation will go through, but the politicians don't care about a multi-billion-dollar global industry and that it doesn't matter to their constituencies is incredibly absurd to me. I don't think this is the right direction at all for a movement like this. I think it's incredibly damaging and it makes our entire industry look bad, both on the player side and the developer side. If we're going to be putting forward anything that may eventually turn into legislation, it should be passing because it's the right thing to do for consumers and developers and that there's some kind of a middle ground, not just because it's an easy win and politicians don't care. This sets us off on a completely wrong foot.
EU law is already unclear on a lot of this practice anyway.
And that's dangerous. If we're going to be setting precedent, which could change the way that law works all the way down the road, then we need to be sending the right message, which this is sending a vague message that doesn't cover the actual problem. So this is not a win to me. This is a huge risk.
And we would be...
And not even just a huge risk, it's just there's so much more that we could include in something like this. Like so much predatory practice that some games, especially mobile and gacha games do. Loot boxes, everything like, although personally I like loot boxes because I just like the gambling aspect of it. But still, it is gambling and gambling is not good even if I enjoy it. I have a problem, okay? But I do agree that it is not good. And it should have strict like regulations on how they can do it. Like right now I am playing AFK Journey on my phone because I enjoy the game. And it has sometimes like bundles pop up. And it says to you that you get 2 things in that bundle for free. And then you have to pay once. And after you paid once, it has another few free thing. Those are not free. You already paid for it. And it is just wrapping you around its finger to buy every little step because you see that there are free things after it. But that is a lie. And there are so much stuff like this, so much predatory thing, especially in mobile games, but there are plenty of them in normal PC and console games too, that should be put under this. That has to be included. This thing has to be included.
Be making it easy for them to settle it. It falls in line with other consumer practices. You know how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it?
In the case of live service games, in the terms of service for those, you are not buying the game. You're buying a license to the game. And that's the part that's really different here.
Or they are free to play, like a War Thunder, or like League, like whatever. So you don't even buy the game. And if you buy something in that game, how are you even supposed to keep that after the game shuts down? Like, there is no logic in that. For example, let's get this here. For example, here is an airsoft. YouTube, it's an airsoft. You can see the feeder there. So, if the gun goes away, but I still have the attachments, what am I to do with the attachments without the gun that it's for? Of course, you can say because it's a gun, you can put on another gun. But let's say for the example's sake that this is a game. This is a one unique game. And these attachments are specifically made for this one unique game that is the gun. It represents the gun representing that. So if I lose the gun and I don't have the gun anymore because it was a live service game in this example, then the skins and the attached stuff that I buy for it, the microtransactions that I get for it, they are worthless without the base thing. So I don't know why is that wording in that goddamn legislation to begin with. Like, it's stupid.
If we don't like the idea of live service games as a whole, I get it. Don't play live service games then. Don't agree to those terms. But if we're under this weird idea that we need to get rid of all live service games or damage that practice in any way to keep in line with consumer policies, it is in line with consumer policies. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be there in the first place. So this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. You're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game.
Yeah.
In the niche cases where a studio is trying to sell a game as if you are buying it or purchasing it or using that language specifically and they give you a live service game instead, I agree that should change. That language should change.
Yes.
You are not purchasing the game, you are not buying the game, you are paying to have a license to a live service experience. I get that. Is that what this is doing though? The initiative is not trying to call that out specifically. It's trying to say that all games need to stay in a functional, playable state, which is not calling out the language that is being used to manipulate.
Which is, by the way, I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think. That every game that you ever purchased should be playable or should go open source after the developer doesn't want to keep it up. I think in an ideal world, that would be the right thing to do, and that would be the ideal thing to do.
The player. Call that out specifically, not this vague bullshit.
And finally, this is a diversion from really serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
That's really gross to me as well. The idea that this is just a diversion from serious topics and they can get an easy win in and we can just push it through and there won't be a lot of pushback on it and they're not going to have to think about it too hard. That's crazy dangerous, dude. If you're going to be setting precedent, if you're going to be putting forward something that you want to start a conversation to eventually become legislation, and these are the reasons for it, not only can I not agree with the initiative, but I can't agree with you. And I think that the tactics that you're using here are really disgusting. So yes, I won't agree with that. And I won't agree with Ross. There's no way around that. I think this is gross. To sum it all up, no, I will not be supporting the initiative Stop Killing Games. You're not going to change my mind on it because I find this language to be incredibly vague and damaging to the rest of our industry.
It's
I think that it
definitely
would be bad
not good.
for both developers and players
For
down the line
everyone.
in the way that it is currently written. And I think that starting a conversation that doesn't get to the core of the issue is both wasted time and leads to potentially bad outcomes. So if we want to talk about this, let's talk about the actual bad business practices. In the case that a studio is making a live service game and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game. I think that we should be fighting about that. That needs to go away. A player should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license, not buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license, to protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be better informed to the player at time of purchase. So I agree on that. This doesn't bring that up though. It just attacks all video games that have online-only components and says that they need to keep being able to be played indefinitely. That doesn't make any sense to me. Aside from that, a lot of people really like live service games as they exist now. So trying to kill off all live service games, as some people have said online, doesn't make any sense either. Live service games are a great way to get away from the real world. They are about social interaction between players. Some people get married in them. Some people met their spouse in them and then got married in them. It's a really cool thing for a point in time in which you're having that social experience. And to destroy that just because you don't like them is very weird. I don't think that makes a lot of sense to me. I also don't think it makes sense the way that Ross is posing this is why it's going to pass. I think that's incredibly inflammatory and could lead to a lot of damage to both what he's trying to stop and to games as a whole. To say that the government just doesn't care and this is an easy win and we're going to get it through is disingenuous. You're talking about a multi-billion-dollar global industry. To think that the government isn't going to be meticulously looking through this and looking for flaws and holes is absurd. So I don't think that's honest at all, and I find it disgusting. So for everyone who's mad about that, fine. Be angry about it. I'm not going to change my stance on that because I can't agree with this, both as a dev and a player. I see the danger involved, I see the vagueness in the language, and it doesn't make sense to me. If we want to fight for better conditions for players, then fight the actual problem. Don't make new ones.
Thor is really right on a bunch of things. That is for sure. Let me start out with that. But I do think in an ideal world, you should be able to keep playing whichever game you ever purchased. And I don't think that license selling should be a thing. And even with free-to-play games, I think if you purchase something, you should have the right to play the game even after the game servers go down by the devs. And what I mean by that is that they should, you know what, they don't even have to provide us with a server infrastructure or whatever, because I am pretty damn sure if a game is well liked, even after its official shutdown, there are going to be private servers around. For example, here is one example that I bring up. Terra shut down, but there are still private servers for it. And this is not the only MMORPG that has private servers running. There are more online servers, there are whole forums for Aeon, for the Dragon, for so many games. Literally, Terra servers. There's so many MMORPGs that has this. And for example, the thing that I mentioned, Return of Reckoning. Okay, so this is the private server, or right now it is the official server for the Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning. It is an old MMORPG, a really good MMORPG. And we still have a server running. Not many players, don't get me wrong, but it has enough players to keep itself up from donations and just a passion project. So I think being able to keep a game alive as a community, as the game's community, should be something we can do. Because we already have precedents for that. And it did not cost the developers anything, literally. They don't have to develop the game anymore, they don't have to support the game anymore, they don't have to do anything. The only tricky part here is with licensing. Just as Thor mentioned as well. But of course that can be resolved in a way too. You can just change the car names or whatever. Like you can just change the models. You can do these things and modders can do it. Okay? Like for example, look at this, like for Daisy. Daisy has Glocks. But Daisy's Glock called Mlock. These guns are technically Glocks, but since Daisy does not have the Glock licensing, they renamed it to Mlock, and it looks a bit different. So even with the licensing things, we can have ways around it. That's what I'm trying to say here. So even though I do agree with Thor, on the fundamentals, that the whole initiative is really vague, it's not well worded, it needs a lot of work, and it needs to have both sides on it too. But overall, I think it is a good idea. Players to have the freedom to play the games even after the developers don't want to run the servers anymore. I mean, at that point, you're not losing any money, you're not doing anything, you can just give them the game, basically. Let them run it. If they want to run it, if they want to play it, if the community wants to continue. And then you can move on to your next project or whatever. I think that is fair. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. Leave a like, leave a dislike, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.